Hi, I'm Emily from the Economics Tutoring Center here at ASU, and today we're going to do some macro review. This specific video is going to cover some definitions from the beginning of the class, as well as how shifts in supply and demand can affect the market. So remember that notation can vary from professor to professor, so be sure to check with them before you utilize any exact methods we use here. But otherwise, here we go. All right, so for the first question, we're looking at what the opportunity cost of an item is. And this is very simply just asking us for a definition. But one of the ways you may be able to approach the problem and make it a little bit easier on yourself is by defining what you think the opportunity cost is, or what you know it to be, before you look at the answer options. So the definition of opportunity cost is the value of the best alternative foregone, or the next best option. So when we choose to make one good, we have to give up something else, or when we choose to buy one good, we choose to give up buying something else. So knowing that, let's go through these answers. A, the number of hours needed to earn money to buy the item. Okay, so that focuses more on how much we need to work to be able to afford it, but it doesn't discuss an opportunity cost. B, what you give up to get that item. Okay, well that seems pretty close to what we were defining earlier, so let's think about this one. C, usually less than the dollar item of the item. Well, that's not related at all. The dollar value of that item is very simply just the price. But if we remember that the dollar value is associated with price, and what we give up is associated with opportunity cost, the question might become a little bit simpler. So the answer is B. The opportunity cost of an item is what you give up to get that item. Total output in an economy increases when each person specializes because... Alright, so what we're wanting to focus on in this question is this word specializes, or if it also said specialization, or specialization from trade. Whenever we see terms like this, we need to be thinking of comparative advantage. And what this means is that if we're all specializing according to our comparative advantage, we're all producing the items that we have the lowest opportunity cost in. And by doing this, we increase our total output because we're all working on whatever we do most efficiently. So let's look at our answers. A, there is less competition for the same resources. Well, no, we're not talking about competition. B, each person spends more time producing that product in which he or she has a comparative advantage. Well, that seems pretty close to what we were discussing earlier. Let's go ahead and read the rest of the answers. C, a wider variety of products will be produced within each country due to specialization. When we specialize, we are actually making fewer things because we only do what we make best. And D, government necessarily plays a larger role in the economy due to specialization. Well, this is not necessarily true. We're producing according to our comparative advantage and whatever we have a lower opportunity cost in, not whatever the government is telling us to create. So the answer is B. Each person spends more time producing the product in which he or she has a comparative advantage. And once again, this just means that they're producing according to whatever they have the lowest opportunity cost in. Alright, the producer that can produce a greater quantity of output relative to another producer, and then it's asking us what this idea of producing a greater quantity of output is associated with. So before we look at the answers, let's define two things: absolute advantage and comparative advantage. Comparative advantage is, as we've been discussing earlier, whoever can make something at a lower or the lowest opportunity cost. So whoever can make an object or a good for the least trade-off. When we look at absolute advantage, we're talking purely about quantities. So who can make more of one good? So if a country can make 100 more of one good over the other country, it doesn't necessarily matter how cheaply they're creating it, we're just focused on the fact that they can make more. And so this idea of producing a greater quantity of output relative to another producer is the definition of absolute advantage in the production of that good. The quantity demanded of a good is the amount that buyers are. All right, so before we approach these answers, let's go ahead and draw one of those demand curves. So, drawing the graph with price on the y-axis and quantity on the x-axis, the law of demand states that the demand curve is downward sloping. So we have that. Now, this question is asking what quantity demanded is, so we're focusing on a quantity, but each quantity is associated with a particular price. So, at a price of A, this quantity, we'll call it Q1, is what the consumers are willing and able to purchase. That's what the demand curve tells us. It gives us a series of prices, or points, that tell us how much the people are willing and able to purchase of that good. So which of the multiple choice answers gives us the best description of that? Well, it's very simply B. What are we willing and able to purchase? Now the market demand curve. So we each have our own demands. So let's say we had Sally and Rick, and they both have 2 demands. All right, so at a price of 2, P equals 2, Sally's quantity demanded is equal to 6, and that's quantity demand because it's one specific quantity at one specific price on a single demand curve. Rick, at a price of 2, his quantity demanded is 8. And so when we're doing a market demand curve, all we're doing is summing up all the individual quantity demands for people in the market. So if Sally and Rick are the only people in the market, at a price of 2, our market quantity demand is going to be 6 plus 8, or 14. And so we would be drawing another graph where 2 was associated with a point of 14. And so the way we would create a curve, I know I've sort of already drawn it in, but we would need to be looking at how multiple points bring us different quantities. So we would compare what Sally and Rick, what their quantity demands are at a price of 3, and so on and so forth, so that we can create an entire curve. So, going back up to the multiple choice question, the market demand curve is A, found by vertically adding the individual demand curves. Well, what did we do here? We added quantity demanded. And where is quantity? Quantity is on the x-axis. So, putting in these labels one last time. Horizontal is flat like that, and vertical is like this. So we associate horizontal with the quantity and vertical with the price. And so is the market demand curve found vertically by adding the individual demand curves? No, it's found by horizontally adding the individual demand curves, because once again, quantity is on our horizontal axis. So it's not A. B, slopes upward. Well, very simply, no. The law of demand states that we're going to have a negative sloping demand curve. C represents the sum of all prices that all the buyers are willing to pay for a given quantity of the good. Once again, what did we sum to get this 14? We added quantities, not prices. So that leaves us with D. The market demand curve represents the sum of quantities demanded by all the buyers at each price of the good. The quantity supplied of a good is the amount that. All right, so when we talk about quantity supplied or supply in general, we're referring to the firm. or the producer, or the seller. There's many different ways we can talk about it, but in general, we're talking about the person who's going to sell the good to the consumer. So quantity supplied of that good would be how much that they are willing and able to sell to the consumer. But let's go ahead and draw a supply line just to analyze this a bit more. So supply is upward sloping. Again, we still have price and quantity. And each price, so price A, at this specific point, is associated with a specific quantity supplied on the supply curve. And what Q here represents, here I'll actually call it Q1, what Q1 here represents is the quantity supplied of firms at a price of A. So which of these answers makes the most sense given what we've gone over here? Well, we're going to focus on sellers, right? It's not just what they're able to produce, but what they're willing and able to produce. Because just because you can make a good doesn't mean you'll sell it if you can't make enough money for it. So D, the quantity supplied of a good is the amount that sellers are willing and able to sell. All right, and that's all I have for today for the beginning review of macroeconomics. I hope you found this helpful. Feel free to come visit us at the Tutoring Center.